The morning after any great battle is often silent. But on the plain of Cannae, on August 3rd, 216 BC, the silence was punctuated by the sounds of unimaginable horror. The Roman historian Livy tells us that as the sun rose and the Carthaginian victors turned to gathering the spoils of war and inspecting the carnage before them, they found thousands upon thousands of dead and wounded Roman soldiers that now scattered the frostbitten ground. Livy describes how a few, whose wounds had been staunched by the morning frost, even rose from among the heaps of dead, all covered in blood. Others were discovered still alive by lying there with their knees or hamstrings sliced apart, baring their necks or throats and begging their enemies to drain the rest of their blood. Some horrors defied belief. Livy's account further describes the discovery of a Numidian soldier found trapped alive beneath the body of a Roman, his nose, his cheeks, his ears torn to shreds. Though ultimately defeated, the Roman had fought to his final breath, and when his hands could no longer grip his weapon, his rage had turned to madness. He died tearing at his enemy's face and biting the flesh off with his teeth. What shocked me when researching for this video was the sheer scale of the slaughter. At Cannae, the Romans lost more men in just a few hours than the entire British army on the first day of the Somme, some 70,000 soldiers. Such was the true horror of the Battle of Cannae. It's difficult to even comprehend that this level of slaughter was even possible 2,000 years before World War I, and harder still to think that it was all done by hand. But it was the aftermath of a day of military genius so perfect and of carnage so absolute that its name is still synonymous with annihilation. This is the story of how one man's obsessive hatred, combined with a deep understanding of his enemy's pride, led to one of the bloodiest single days in ancient history. This is the story of the Battle of Cannae. To understand the visceral hatred that fueled this battle, you have to understand its architect, Hannibal Barca. You see, this wasn't just a war for Hannibal, it was the fulfillment of a sacred vow taken decades earlier. As a 9-year-old boy, his father, Hamilcar, a great Carthaginian general during the First Punic War, had made him swear an oath upon a sacrificial altar, an oath of an eternal enmity towards the Roman Republic. It's this personal, lifelong obsession that I find so fascinating. It's what makes Cannae more than just a battle. It completely transforms a geopolitical conflict into something far more primal, a vendetta. And Hannibal had the genius to make Rome pay attention. In 218 BC, at just 28 years old, Hannibal launched one of the most audacious military campaigns in history. He marched his army, a multi-ethnic force of Iberians, of Gauls, Numidians, and some 37 war elephants, out of Iberia, across the Pyrenees, and over the frozen spine of the Alps, descending into Italy's heartland with a vengeful spectre. His arrival was a shock to the Roman system. He handed them two stunning and humiliating defeats, first at the Battle of Trebia and again at the Battle of Lake Trisimene, where he ambushed and utterly annihilated a consular army. Rome wasn't just losing either, it was being outthought, outflanked, and butchered on its own soil for the first time. Panicked and furious, the Romans did what it did best. It escalated the conflict. The Senate authorized the creation of the largest single army in the Republic's history. Some sources suggest that this colossal force reached up to 86,000 men, a juggernaut of Roman might assembled with one singular purpose: to find Hannibal and erase him from the face of the earth. But this mighty instrument of vengeance had a critical, almost unbelievable flaw. It was commanded by not one, but two elected consuls. Lucius Aemilius Paulus, a cautious and experienced veteran, and Gaius Terentius Varro, a populist and rash commander eager for glory. By Roman tradition, they held supreme command on alternating days. It's a system that, to modern military minds, seems completely insane. And, as we'll see, it was this institutional pride, this blind faith in their system, that Hannibal was counting on. On the morning of the battle, on August 2nd, it was Varro's day to take command. He marched the army onto the flat, dusty plain that Hannibal had so carefully chosen the week before. A hot southern wind, the Lebecchio, began to blow, whipping dust and grit into the faces of the advancing Romans. The Roman legions formed up into an incredibly deep and powerful column, a human battering ram, if you like, designed to smash through the enemy with sheer and unstoppable force. Facing them was Hannibal's army, looking smaller, more fragile. His formation must have looked bizarre to the Roman commanders. He placed his least reliable troops, the Gauls and the Iberians, in the very centre of his line, and pushed them forward in a shallow crescent that bulged towards the enemy Roman legions. So the question is, why would any sane general put his weakest soldiers in the most exposed position, inviting attack? Well, the answer is the key to Hannibal's genius. It wasn't just a sign of weakness, it was a carefully constructed psychological trap. The battle exploded in mid-afternoon. On Hannibal's left flank, his superior heavy cavalry crashed into their Roman counterparts. In the confined space near the river, it was a brutal and hacking melee. The Roman cavalry was overwhelmed, shattered, and even driven away from the field. Right from the start, one Roman flank was left completely naked. Seeking to regain the advantage, the massive Roman infantry column, a roaring tide of 86,000 men, slammed into Hannibal's thin and weak centre. The sound must have been completely deafening, a grinding procession of steel, wood and flesh. Just as Hannibal had planned, his Gallic and Iberian troops began to give way, fighting desperately but failing to hold back the immense pressure of heavily armoured legionaries. Their bulging line began to sag, bending from a convex crescent into a deep, U-shaped pocket. From the Roman perspective, this must have looked like it. Victory was surely at hand. You can almost imagine the triumphant roars as they surged forward, pouring into the gap, their own formation becoming ever more compressed and disordered in the frenzied pursuit. But they had just taken the bait. With chilling precision, Hannibal snapped the jaws of his trap shut. As the Romans plunged deeper and deeper, their flanks, once protected by the sheer mass of their own formation, became fatally exposed. On Hannibal's signal, his elite African infantry, who had been held back in reserve like coiled springs, pivoted inwards. They didn't charge into the front. They smashed the sides of the vast Roman column, and at the same time, Hannibal's victorious heavy cavalry, having regrouped and swept around, crashed into the rear of the Roman soldiers. I can't even imagine the claustrophobia and the sheer terror that must have swept through the Roman ranks at that moment. They were now surrounded on all sides, compressed so tightly that many soldiers couldn't even lift up their arms to wield their weapons. They had gone from being a disciplined army to a hapless mob. The battle was now over, but the massacre had just begun. Hannibal's men began the grim work of methodically grinding down the outer layers of the Roman mass. The consul Paulus, wounded but refusing to flee, was himself cut down in the fighting on foot amongst his men. For hours and hours, the slaughter continued, a horrifyingly efficient process of destruction until the very ground was soaked with Roman blood. When the sun finally set over the plains of Cannae, the scale of the Roman disaster was almost beyond belief. Ancient historians claim as many as 50 to 70,000 Romans were killed, for the loss of fewer than 6,000 of Hannibal's men. An entire generation of Rome's fighting men and a huge portion of its ruling class had been wiped out in a single afternoon. In the euphoric Carthaginian camp, Hannibal's cavalry commander, Hannibal, famously urged him to march on Rome itself. "Ride ahead," he said, "and you will be dining in the capital in 5 days." When Hannibal hesitated, Hannibal allegedly spoke the words that would echo through history. "You know how to win a victory, Hannibal. You do not know how to use one." It's one of history's greatest what-ifs. Was Hannibal's hesitation a mistake? Or was it a calculated move by a general who understood that his army, while brilliant in the field, lacked the numbers and siege equipment to take on the fortifications of Rome itself? Well, we will never know for sure, but this, for me, is the most astounding part of the entire story, and it reveals the true secret of Roman power. Any other nation-state in the ancient world would have been completely broken by a defeat on this scale. They would have collapsed, surrendered, and possibly sued for peace on almost any terms. But Rome was different. The Senate, in an act of almost insane defiance, refused to negotiate with Hannibal. They refused to ransom the thousands and thousands of Roman prisoners. They forbade the public to display any mourning in the streets, instead channeling the city's grief into a silent, burning determination for revenge. They began raising new armies, recruiting from every class of society, even buying and arming slaves to defend the city. This is the great paradox of Cannae. Hannibal had crafted a battle so perfect that it's still studied as the benchmark for tactical genius. But he had made one critical miscalculation. He fundamentally misjudged the character of his enemy. He had destroyed their army, yes, but he had failed to destroy their unbreakable will, and in the end, it was that resilience that won the war. A new Roman general, Scipio, who was a young officer at Cannae and one of the few who escaped the slaughter, would take the brutal lessons of that day, adapt them, and eventually defeat Hannibal on his own home soil in Africa. The legacy of Cannae is therefore twofold. It is a chilling testament to one man's military genius, but it's also a powerful story of how a nation's character, its stubborn, iron will, refused to break, and can be even more formidable as a weapon than any army. That single bloody day on a dusty plain didn't just create a legend, it forged the very spirit that Rome would use to build an empire. But now I'd like to hear from you. What do you find the most historically significant? Hannibal's perfect tactics or Rome's superhuman ability to absorb a catastrophic defeat? Leave your thoughts in the comments below and I will read them as much as I can. And if you want to be part of more conversations like this, then please don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you in the next one.